All right, we're back on SportsBIT. Paulie and Teddy, Betting Insight today, weekend preview edition. We finish out the NFC North with the deep dive with the Minnesota Vikings. Big game breakdown is going to be the Nationals and the Pirates and the Tigers and the Royals. No bad beats and no bad bets to talk about. So, keys to beating the books and making money in the second half of the baseball season. General strategy, first game back, the ace starters have the edge. Maybe with that time off, the hitters have to, they're out of their rhythm a little bit, Teddy.
Yeah, I mean, you almost look at it as one of the first days of the Major League Baseball season when you're viewing that first weekend after the All-Star break. And in general, the first weekend of the MLB season, you're not betting a whole lot of overs. And for me, the first weekend back, I'm not betting a whole lot of overs. You know, the aces legitimately do have an edge over the hitters. And when you got guys that are in that midseason rhythm offensively, and all of a sudden you give them 4 days off, they're not always in that midseason rhythm offensively when they come back. But it is worth noting that bullpens, in theory, you say, oh, the bullpens have the edge. Everything's rested. Everyone's rested. But I'm telling you, it seems like there are more than a few seemingly random blow-ups in the first few games after the break than in your normal average week. Bettors should be aware of that.
And I'll tell you, the Giants laid this out beautifully. Mad Bum almost threw the no-no on Sunday night, and he comes right back and pitches tonight in San Diego. So a good job there by Bochy. Does the break cool off the hot teams and help out the cold teams?
In general, markets tend to think that this happens over the All-Star break. And frankly, the results long-term show some of it. That being said, the ice-cold teams, for me, are teams that I have a real hard time jumping right on after the All-Star break. And there's three to talk about. Tampa, no one was colder than the Rays going into the break. Were they 3-22 in their last 25 games? I'm not convinced Tampa bounces back off that slump. You had Arizona. They were ice-cold. Were they 2-12 their last 14 going into the break? And then, of course, the Chicago Cubs, who were 2-9 in their last 11 and 6-15 in their last 21. Three ice-cold teams. And of the three, Chicago's still in first place in their division. The stretch that they had was a slump, but not a season killer. For Tampa, for Arizona, the slumps they've had in June and into July, season killers. So I'm not convinced those squads come out with the requisite level of energy and enthusiasm they need for the second half of the campaign. That being said, your hot teams, your Torontos, your Pittsburgh, San Francisco, all 8-2 in their last 10 games before the break. And again, you don't expect that momentum to carry forward necessarily, but you don't expect those teams to come out ice cold and give it all back the first week.
So money to be made in August. Explain why the markets fall asleep around that time.
Well, look, it's very normal, Paulie. Think about what you and I do. Once football starts, once camps open, once everyone's paying attention to the NFL and college, the markets don't pay attention to MLB. It really is that simple. And also, you have what I call the fallacy of full season numbers. If you're paying attention in August, betting baseball, you're going to find all kinds of full season numbers that are lying, that are telling stories that aren't based on current realities. You're going to have guys that pitched great in April and May, and you look at their second half numbers are getting rocked, and guys that were awful early in the season, and you look at their second half numbers and their aces. And if you can take advantage of those, because again, the markets, the folks that concentrate on MLB, you'll see some of these moves work, but overall, there's a lot less focus on MLB. If you take the time, there's money to be made. Give it about, 2 weeks after the break, Paulie, and everyone stops paying attention.
Yep. Hey, we had a trade yesterday. The Red Sox get Palmer, and a good deal. They get Pomerantz from the Padres, and they desperately needed an arm.
Yeah, they sure did. And this is the second deal that they made with San Diego. They had the big one in the offseason where they got Craig Kimbrell for prospects. And here, Boston showed, hey, we're going to win now. We're talking about, I believe, the second or third prospect in the organization, a top 20 prospect in all of baseball, in Anderson Espinosa going to San Diego. And Boston was willing to let one of those top prospects go for, let's be honest, with Pomerantz, he had a great first half. First half of the season, this is a guy who was a former first rounder back in 2010. He was an all-star with San Diego. At times this year, he was dominant. 67 hits allowed in 102 innings over 17 starts. Ranked second in the majors in opponents' batting average and opponents' OPS. But the 3 months that Pomeranz had, that's all he's had in his career. I mean, this is a guy that hasn't been able to last in a starting rotation. He was in Colorado. He flunked out of Colorado. He flunked out of Oakland. He was never able to last and be consistent enough to be successful. Boston's betting that a 27-year-old pitcher who had a great first half is going to be better than what they've had over the back half of the rotation. And with Clay Buchholz and Eduardo Rodriguez both really struggling, they needed some help for the second half with that starting rotation behind Price, Wright, and Porcello.
I don't think the Orioles can keep this up. I mean, they're throwing Ubaldo and Gallardo out there, and they really struggled with their starting pitching. Where do you rank these AL teams, and is Boston the team to beat now in the East?
You know, the Pomeranz trade, to me, it certainly puts the Red Sox in the discussion for the number one team in the American League. Not that they were far from that discussion prior to the trade, but, you know, getting a nasty young lefty with the potential to be really good is, in my mind, that puts Boston number two. I've still got Cleveland ranked as the best team in the American League, and I think Cleveland is the team to beat. When you look at their starting pitching, no one can match it. And that being said, I got the Indians 1, I got the Red Sox 2 after this deal, and number 3, I've got the Houston Astros, who came on like a freight train after that ice-cold start. And note that on that list of the best 3 teams in the American League, I do not have the team with the best record in the American League. That's the Texas Rangers. The Rangers, they overachieved in the first half of the campaign. I would expect them to come back to earth over the second half of the season, like you're talking about with Baltimore.
Excellent television last night. Sad TV, 30 for 30 ESPN. Doc and Daryl should have been 2 of the best of all time. On the same team, Doc Gooden in 1985, and they were both, drugs did him in. Gooden was 24-5 with a 1.53 ERA, and he was 20 years old.
Yeah, I saw him as a rookie in '84 at Shea Stadium. You know, again, I was a New York kid. I was a Mets fan, which meant that I was doomed to a lifetime of horror when the Yankees were winning World Series, and I was in elementary school. And it was kind of a big deal. So it was part of my identity. And then in the Mets, you know, Gooden's coming up through the system, and Strawberry's coming up through the system. I'm like, oh my God, we actually have stars. And I watched Gooden as a rookie. I'm telling you, his people remember his fastball. They don't remember his curveball, that 12-6 curve, just buckled hitters' knees. He was good as anyone I've ever seen. It was as good a start as any start I've ever seen in baseball. But, of course, coulda, woulda, shoulda. You know, they certainly had that potential. But, I mean, you know, Kerry Wood had a lot of potential too, didn't he? And Mark Breyer. Cubs didn't win a whole lot of World Series with those guys either.
Well, you know, Dusty Baker certainly helped throwing all those pitches and all those innings as well. But, oh, man, sad with Gooden and Strawberry. Check that out if you have some time this weekend. Big game breakdown up next. We'll start with the Nationals and the Pirates as baseball's back. We finish it out with the Minnesota Vikings on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Hey, SportsBIT viewers. Tune into the MLB Odds Couple show today for Friday, July 15th. My second half plays in MLB have been just great, and I got 2 or 3 more that I'm liking once again today for Friday, July 15th. Mike Brennan, you ready for the second half?
I sure am, but Pistol Pete, you are on fire.
Well, on second halves, but that's the one you should pay attention to. I do have a few more, so tune into today's show, Friday, July 15th.
Don't miss it.
Back on SportsBIT, as always, live odds, sportsbookreview.com. We start with the Nationals and the Pirates. It's Strasburg against Liriano. Nationals 210, 7.5 the total. Strasburg's ERA, the second half, the last 3 years, a full run lower than his first half ERA. They are 15-1 in his last 16 starts. The books can't make the line high enough here. What do you think of this one, Teddy?
You know, it's an interesting conundrum with Steven Strasburg right now, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this game first. Here's a guy who, A, he's been better every second half compared to the first half. All right. 2, he's been about as good as a pitcher can be over the first half of this season, with the Nats 15-1 in his 16 starts. I mean, the books, as you mentioned, they can't make a number high enough. So here's the question. Can you possibly make money with a guy like Steven Strasburg over the second half of the campaign? And my basic theory is no, you can't. Here's a guy who is absolutely being valued correctly or too high by the markets. All right. He's overpriced in every start. The books have to do it. And even though he's had all of this success, including great success against the Pirates, there's no way I can lay $2 with the Nationals this ball game. Look, they sent 4 players to the All-Star game, which is always a concern to me. I like the team that didn't send guys to the All-Star game, not guys that had great success in the All-Star game. We'll talk about that with the Royals and Tigers in just a moment. But not only do they send these players to the All-Star game, they're also going against a Pirates team that hasn't just been good in an underdog role. They went 9-19 in June. Everyone wrote off Pittsburgh as dead. They were 100-1 to win the World Series in places here in town. Well, here in July, where'd they go? 8-2 in 10 games. All 8 of those cashes as an underdog price, Paulie. Every one of them at an underdog price, which tells me the markets are not pricing Pittsburgh appropriately, both going into the break and right here coming at it.
But wait a second, we got Liriano going tonight, and he hasn't recorded an out after the 6th inning since May 18th. He hasn't recorded an out after the 5th in any of his last 4 starts, and he leads MLB in walks per 9 innings by a wide margin. What's going on with this guy?
Well, we've talked a fair bit about Liriano on this show, and you can look at the graphic and see what's going on with his walks per 9 innings ratio. It's been a problem for him all year long. That being said, he has a fairly good track record against Washington. Current Nationals have hit only .208 against him in their careers. A .685 OPS. There's a decent sample size there. And you look at Liriano, again, you look at those pre-break, post-break splits. I always like to look at the last 3 years in aggregate. The last 3 years pre-break, the guy's 15-16. The last 3 years post-break, he's 20-9. There's definitely some randomness in that. There's a ton when it comes to Major League Baseball randomness, wins and losses, and your one-loss record. But the bottom line for Liriano is that he's been cashing tickets in every recent second half. I could only look at the Pirate side here, despite Washington's extraordinary success with their ace on the hill.
Remember, live odds, sportsbookreview.com. Next up, the Tigers and the Royals. It's Verlander against Kennedy. Tigers $1.45, 8.5 the total. Verlander's won 6 of his last 8 decisions, and he's 21-8 career against Kansas City with a 3.26 ERA. The 21 wins, the most against any opponent.
Yeah, and again, you look at the Verlander splits, the pre-All-Star break versus the post-All-Star break. The last 3 years, pre-break, he's 4.32. Post-break, he's 3.34. And unlike Liriano, his stats actually showed improvement over the back half of these campaigns. Now, pre-break this year, he's 4.07. So, in line with his career numbers, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Verlander have at least modest success over the back half of the campaign. But, it's a Tigers team that's been pretty banged up. J.D. Martinez still on the DL, 2/5 of their starting rotation, with Daniel Norris and Jordan Zimmerman still on the DL. It looks like Anibal Sanchez is going to be getting another start or two for Detroit, which is certainly a problem for the Tigers here. But you look at the struggles of some of those guys, you compare them to Ian Kennedy, and Kennedy's had some really rough numbers the last couple of years anywhere, except for in his home parks. We talked about this on SportsBIT last week, with the struggles he's had outside of Petco or Kaufman.
This 5-16 with a 4.62 ERA. He did pitch well in Toronto, but the ground ball percentage is career low. And you look at this graphic, the road home run per 9 innings the last 2 seasons. Sanchez, there's Kennedy in the middle, Casimir, and Weaver. So you got all these issues with Kennedy. And the Royals are 16-30 on the road this year. They're good at home, awful on the road. And now, guess what? As we talked about, Wade Davis on the DL. So the bullpen takes a big blow here.
Exactly. You have Davis on the DL. You have Lorenzo Cain, the spark plug in center field, on the DL. And we talk about the guys that play in the All-Star game. Well, Hosmer and Perez were the heroes of the All-Star game for the American League. Hosmer wins the MVP. So that, to me, even though it's like a letdown in your first game back, it's a problem. Ned Yost got the quote. I felt like a proud papa in there in the second inning after those 2 guys gave us the lead. It's been a long time since I've been that proud of 2 players in a moment like that. No, I don't want KC. Tonight, we'll get back to this game a little bit more when it comes to play of the day time.
Yes, up next, the Minnesota Vikings. We finish off the NFC North. Can they do it again and repeat? It's coming up on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today.
Always on the go? Bet365 has one of the top mobile platforms in today's market. Sign up today and don't let your busy life keep you out of the game.
Back on SportsBIT, Paulie and Teddy, we finish out the NFC North. AFC East coming up next week. We only got 2 divisions left after today. The Minnesota Vikings. I'm from Minnesota. They will lose in the most painful way possible and rip your heart out. Brett Favre, the interception in the NFC Championship game at New Orleans. Gary Anderson on the team that was 15-1. got beat at home, double-digit favorite against Atlanta. And look what happened last year with Blair Walsh. More on that in a second. Their over-under win total is 9.5. Last year, won the division, 11-5 straight up, 13-3 ATS. Number one in the NFL, 11-4-1 to the under. And they lost to the Seahawks at home in the first round, where it was 10 below. 29th in total offense, 13th in total defense, tied for 15th in yards per play, and tied for 10th in turnover differential. Will there be a carryover with Blair Walsh? Can he erase that from his mind after he missed what was actually an extra point to advance and win a playoff game at home?
Well, let's start with this, okay? I went into the offseason. You don't have a ton of, I don't like to give myself a ton of opinions on these teams before I start doing my work, but I really went into the offseason thinking, the Vikings last year, they were kind of fluky. I really didn't want to like Minnesota this year. I'm like, I want to be betting the Vikings under. I don't know that I like this team. And you start doing your work, you're like, man, there's a lot to like about Minnesota. And there really is. And let's start with this, okay? They went 11-5 last year. They went 13-3 against the spread, the number one spread team in the NFL, as you mentioned. And they did that with the number 29 total offense. They were barely above average in anything. They were a little bit above average in total defense. They were outgained on a yards per play basis. Okay, they were +5 in turnovers, tied for 10th in turnover margin. But basically, all of their stats said, yeah, we're okay. Not division winners in a competitive division and dominant against the spread. So that tells us that if Minnesota can improve on some of those numbers this year, and again, as we're going to go through this team, I think they can, well, maybe they can have a lot of point spread success again, and maybe they are very live, not only to win the division this time, to maybe to win a couple of playoffs.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I like their coaching staff. I think Zimmer's a good coach, and Norv Turner is a great offensive coordinator, not a good head coach, but a great coordinator. Elite defense, dynamite running back. They take Treadwell in the draft. They got Diggs at wide receiver, right in the slot. And I think all this gets Bridgewater to the next level. You mentioned the numbers, and I know Zimmer thinks Bridgewater played well last year. They just didn't help him out.
Yeah, the quote from Zimmer is great. Teddy was running for his life half the time, and we had a whole bunch of 1-yard runs. We needed to make some changes. And when you look at Minnesota and what they did in the offseason, all right, offensive line depth, number one. And they got great. The offensive line, again, on paper, it looks really good in terms of, when you bring in a guy like Alex Boone, you bring in a guy like Andre Smith, one from San Fran, one from Cincinnati. You get Phil Lodeholt back. You get John Sullivan back, two guys who missed last year with injuries. All of a sudden, their offensive line is loaded. You look at the defense, and it's a defense that was very good last year. Where are they building depth? They're building depth in the secondary. That's exactly what Zimmer did in Cincinnati. And boy, that secondary has a lot of talent on paper and in the ballgame. So you say, all right, what's the questions about Minnesota? And to me, there's one question. Can they move the football? Can Teddy Bridgewater throw downfield? You talk about Treadwell as being the number one pick, and obviously a guy with a ton of potential. Stephon Diggs is a guy that we followed a lot in college, playing in the Big Ten, and a guy who has also big play potential. Jarius Wright in the slot. They and of course Adrian Peterson at running back. They have solid skill position talent, and if Bridgewater has time to get these guys the football, maybe that number 29 ranked offense can improve. And if it improves, Minnesota's going to be really good.
And I think they're building the team the right way, because they got burned when they signed Mike Wallace and gave him all that money, and he was a bust. And they made some other moves that haven't worked out as well. So building through the draft, and some people were concerned they didn't go out and spend a lot of money and get some big-time free agents, but they're doing a hell of a job putting this team together. You run down the numbers, and they won 11 games. It's staggering.
Well, that's the thing, is that the big-name free agents, you can go down and look at when you start reading about the NFL and with all of the comments and commentary on the free agents for the guys that got signed last year and the year before that and the year before that, and it's one bad deal after the next, after the next, after the next. People upset that they didn't waste every dollar that they had under the salary cap. Good. Where they're building depth, where they have quality, offensive line, defensive line, secondary. Those are key areas. You have a quarterback who can play. You can find a way to get the football into the end zone. And Minnesota's got depth in the places that we want them to have depth, Paulie. It's a good-looking team on paper.
Yeah. How about the schedule?
Well, last year's strength of schedule, slightly tougher than the league average. This year's schedule, a tiny bit easier, but still slightly above league average. It is the toughest schedule in the division. We talked earlier in the week about how Green Bay's schedule was remarkably easy for a team of that caliber. And Minnesota's is the toughest. Of course, they do face that first place schedule. Now, we're going to see Minnesota twice on Monday night. We're going to see them on a Sunday night. So the networks are expecting this team to have another good season. But again,
new stadium.
Yeah, and for this year in Minnesota, again, it's a not a brutal schedule, but it is the toughest in the division, even though it is only slightly above league average.
They can't win 10 games? Can't go over 9.5?
That's the only way I could look on this squad.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you, too. It should be a fun team to watch and take that next step.
Oh,
Money
you
time.
homer.
No. Money time, play of the day. Where are we going?
Let's go to Comerica Field in Detroit. Take a look at game number 970, the Detroit Tigers minus 145. I think it's chalk worth laying here against a Kansas City squad that, as you mentioned, Paul, has been struggling on the highway all year. Ian Kennedy, certainly not a guy who I trust to have two brilliant starts in a row. He's coming off a 10 strikeout performance. I don't think he does it twice in a row. Tigers minus 145. That's a play of the day.
All right, we're back Monday. Normal show. Bad beats, bad bets. We recap the British Open. What a job by Phil Mickelson to start. And we get to the AFC East. Have a good weekend. We're back Monday on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.